We always have a blast chatting with our guests about all sorts of different topics, but sometimes we go off the rails and dig deeper into their automotive and motorsports pasts. As a bonus, let's go behind the scenes with this Pit Stop Minisode for some extra content that didn't quite fit in the main episode. Sit back, enjoy, and remember to like, subscribe, and support Break Fix on Patreon.
Tonight, we're honored to revisit the legendary career of Hurley Haywood, one of the most decorated and respected sports car drivers of all time. While many remember Hurley for his victories at the 24 Hours at Daytona and his wins at Le Mans, his time in the Trans-Am series with Audi stands as a defining chapter in American motorsport. Behind the wheel of the powerful Audi Quattro, Hurley helped rewrite the rulebook, showcasing the dominance of all-wheel drive technology on circuits where traditional rear-wheel drive muscle once ruled. His success not only brought Audi unprecedented glory in Trans Am, but also cemented his place as a pioneer who bridged innovation and skill. We'll revisit those groundbreaking seasons and hear firsthand how Hurley Haywood helped change the face of the series and get insight about his time in Trans Am and IMSA from folks like Rick Huey from the IMRRC, legendary pro driver Lynn St. James, and Senior Director of Competition at IMSA, Mark Raffoff. And with that, let's welcome Hurley to Break Fix.
Well, Hurley, it's awesome to have you back in the studio. The last time we got together, we talked about your adventures at Le Mans, and during that episode, we touched just briefly on your history with Audi and with Trans Am. And so we wanted to revisit that part of your motorsports career. Before we dive deep into the Audi era, can you take us back and explain how you ended up in Trans Am racing, how that fit into your broader career, and tell us about how Bob Tullius put together the deal with the Audi program?
I had broken my leg back in 1983. Bob Tullius called up Al Holbert and he said, I'm thinking about hiring Hurley because he can't push the clutch down on a Porsche, but we have a Hewland gearbox and he only has to push the clutch to get in and out of the pits. And Al said to Bob, he said, if you can hire Hurley, do it today because he's one of the best. And that's exactly what happened. So I raced for the Jaguar team, the Tullius team, Group 44, for 2.5 years. And then when that program stopped and it moved over to Walkinshaw decided that he wanted Brian Redmond and myself to come help his team win the race. Well, we were told basically to keep our mouths shut and drive as fast as we could go because he wanted to be on television at the start of the race. And so eventually all 3 cars had mechanical problems and we would move from one car to the other car. And so I don't want to get into the particulars, but it was kind of an amusing roundtable of guys that were going from one car to another car, and then that car would break and move to the third car. So it was a difficult situation to be in. Well, let me back up a little bit. When Bob Tullius lost the Jaguar deal, at the same time, Audi was thinking about coming in to race in the United States. And they wanted to sort of promote the Audi program. And Joe Hoppen called me up and said, I want you to come to Atlanta. We have a 12-hour night race in an Audi Quattro, basically a sedan, 200 sedan, racing seat and seat belts. And that was about the only extent of modifications that they made to the car. So I was saying, you must be joking. So anyway, the weather turned terrible and it was raining like hell. And we were 3rd overall against really race cars. So, I was pretty excited about that. And then about a month later, Joe Hoppen called me and said, what would you think about racing an Audi in the Trans Am? And I kind of thought about it for a moment. And I said, what's the deal? And he said, well, let's go over to Ingolstadt and let me show you the car that they're working on. So we went over, Walter Röhrl was there, and he sort of gave me the background of the car. I got in this thing, and I was really surprised. I said, this is pretty cool. And Joe Hoppen was, of course, the guy that sort of negotiated all the rules and everything. He called me up, and he said, well, what do you think we should do? What team do you think we should get?
Now, was that Tullius?
That was Tullius.
Ran that program.
That relationship lasted 5 years. I drove with the Jags for 2 years or 3 years, and then I drove for him with the Audi program. and he was a great guy. A lot of people didn't like Bob, but I liked him. He and I never had a crossword. I was always kind of a little rebellious. You had to do the uniform thing on that team. You had to be dressed in a uniform every time, and Bob was very explicit about, white shoes, white socks, white shorts, green belt, gold army type style belt buckle, white shirt, the whole 9 yards.
One of the only teams in history whose people were always dressed in white and never got dirty. Not sure how they did that, but I think they had enough uniforms in the truck that if you did, you had to go change right away. But yeah, how many people have white crew guys,
And I would always have one thing that was not quite up to team standard, different colored belt or a slightly different shade of sock or, something like that. And he never said anything. I knew he saw it, but he never said anything. It was a nice relationship with him, and I really liked the team, and I liked the discipline. And, Bob was one of the first guys that really brought professionalism up to a standard that's now enjoyed by everybody. You walk down pit lane in IMSA or wherever it is, and the team and the philosophy that you have with these teams, uniforms, detail, preparation, always started by Bob. Mm-hmm. Bob Tullius really brought that disciplined look to sports car racing.
And the preparation there was always excellent. I mean, I know one of his mechanics used to work on Air Force One, so that's got to be second to none.
He's got all the equipment. He's got the shop. He's got the transporters. They're all spotless, totally in the Audi sort of way of thinking.
You raced for a lot of different teams over the years. I mean, predominantly Porsche, especially Porsche, I'll say. What was it like racing for Audi? What was the team dynamics like? What was the culture like? What was the attitude?
Well, that was definitely a factory team. And Bob, I think, had a hard time at the beginning accepting that role as just sort of the mechanism that let the Audi happen. But all of the decisions on how you would run the car during the race, how you would set the car up engineering-wise, was taken out of his hands and replaced with the factory people. We had a lot of factory people that went to Winchester, which is where the headquarters were for Bob. But it was something that Bob was able to employ all his guys, and his guys were very, very quick to learn the process. So it was a real team effort on both the American side and the German side, where everybody came together and worked very nicely together. I don't really remember any times when there was a lot of friction between those two entities. Everybody worked together.
Did you get a chance to work with or meet Roland Gumpert? He was one of the masterminds behind Audi's success in World Rally Championship.
Yes, I did.
So what was Roland like to work with? Was he involved in the TransAm and the IMSA program too, trying to refine the car?
Yes, I think he was. And the development of those cars went on 12 months out of the year on both the TransAm and the GTO period, the IMSA period. It was a continual development on both types of cars. It was a nice position to be in. And then have guys like Joe Hoppin sort of smoothing the water out, making everybody happy, but it didn't work most of the time. And so that's what happened. And he got the deal, and everybody went over to Ingolstadt to talk about the program and, work out the details. But that was one of the greatest cars. Everybody laughed and said, "What are you doing with this? Is a family sedan. It looks like a family sedan." And I said, "Well, guys, just wait and see." They stopped laughing after the first race because we were just so superior to everything else on the racetrack.
Your first impressions of the Audi, completely different than anything you had driven up until that point. When you compared it to the Porsches and the Jaguars, what was the experience like with a front-heavy, all-wheel drive family sedan, as you put it?
It was actually brilliant to drive. You had to make a little bit of adjustment because it was not a conventional car, so getting used to the all-wheel drive, and it didn't take very long. And I sort of got the technique much quicker than Hans did. Hans was very frustrated at the beginning of the season because we had engineers with both cars. My engineer was different than Hans's engineer, and Hans wanted to set up the car a little bit differently than I liked it. So it took a while for him to get into the rhythm, but I found it, okay, this is what the deal is, and this is what we're going to do. And sure enough, the car was completely dominant in all the Trans Am races. I won the championship for myself and for Audi. And then the SCCA kicked us out. They said, no, four-wheel drive is not allowed. Then we moved over to IMSA.
This is one of the coolest cars we ever developed with Audi, which also became the biggest pain in the butt for us.
We started with a 90 Quattro. And the 90 Quattro in my opinion, was probably one of the best race cars I've ever driven. I mean, that thing was so incredibly awesome.
Full tube frame, 5-cylinder inline turbo.
It had over 700 horsepower.
Hans Stuck, Hurley Haywood, and occasionally Walter Röhrl, the rally driver, who even people like Hans Stuck said when he showed up, I raced for second. The man was amazing. The intriguing thing was the car is a constant all-wheel drive car, which meant it applied the drive you wanted on each wheel based on the grip level that the car was sensing that it needed. It wasn't 20% front, 80% back. It was applying that drive to the wheels as it saw it needed. So the hard part of it was we started it out, Goodyear made them special tires, 14 inches wide. We realized after a couple races, they didn't go to Daytona and Sebring because they didn't think they could finish.
The cars were not really made to do long distance races, so we didn't do Daytona, we didn't do Sebring. But then, I think Stuck won almost every race, and I was second in all those races. So that thing was unbelievable. 700 horsepower, huge tires on the front and rear, and it was really a pretty cool car to drive.
So they started on 14s. We summed down 2-3 races, changed that to 12, and then changed it to 10 a couple races later. And the end result was it made no difference. The 10-inch wide tires worked just as good as the 14-inch tires.
We really dominated the whole series. They were pissed off. They kept adding weight to us and all kinds of restrictions on the engines and the intakes. It made no difference. The cars were just brilliant with the four-wheel drive systems.
Part of the reasons and the learning experience for us was technically what's going on with a car like this is the tire degradation is way better because the load of slowing down is spread over all four wheels. The braking was much better and the acceleration was phenomenal. So it was an amazing car. It's probably, in my opinion, one of the coolest, most technically advanced things that IMSA created. We did some other stuff, but this one was sort of a challenge for them and us to do this. They won the TransAm the year before with a car, an Audi 100, made out of a real production shell. This has nothing to do with that other than the greenhouse silhouette and so on and so forth. But spectacular car. 2 remain. One is here in the USA and one is in Germany. And the significance to Audi is when they just showed their first concept Formula One car, the car that's behind the Formula One car in their display is that car, not the R8 prototype. That's off to the side, but that car is right there. That embodies Audi's performance thing, and it's 1989. Pretty amazing what they were able to do and how they did it.
And we mentioned marketing a little while ago. They're still using video from those days to market the Audi all-wheel drive now, so it really stood out in history, I think.
The all-wheel drive is certainly something that has found its way into lots of different types of production cars now, and it just is a benefit that is well worth people taking a look at. And Audi was the one that kind of pioneered that system in a race car. It was just phenomenal, and that's why they basically banned them. You don't see four-wheel drive cars anymore.
Everybody was out to get us, and nobody really could. Cars were so dominant, the four-wheel drive, regardless of what the conditions were, rain, hot, sandy, whatever the conditions are, the Audis were dominant. The reason we didn't win the championship was because the cars were not built for long distance races, for Daytona and for Sebring. Those were in the calendar for the series, so we missed those 2 races, but we won everything else after that, practically.
I know you had one race here did you do the whole race yourself?
Yeah, I got it into, Scott Goodyear was supposed to drive with me, and Scott was new to the team. I was having a great battle and just didn't want to give it up at the pit stop, so I stayed in. And the Audi, that was really the first time that I had been with a factory team that was excessive. Anything that we wanted, we could have. I mean, if I said, hey guys, I want to have wood paneling on the dashboard. I mean, the next race I'd have wood paneling on the dashboard. It was like a driver's dream, and the cars themselves were absolutely fantastic. I mean, it was just a really nice atmosphere to be able to work in that kind of situation where anything you wanted was possible.
At that time, the term that was used was borrowed from Mark Donohue, the unfair advantage that Audi had because of the all-wheel drive. But it was cutting-edge technology, not just in racing, but in the production world itself. Like Audi put itself on the map after many, many years of being in business by putting all-wheel drive in production cars. And now they bring it to Trans-Am racing. This groundbreaking technology, I mean, you dominated, but with all these penalties, with all the setbacks, with everything that they tried to do to stop the Audi's advantage, how much did you have to adapt as a driver every time they penalized the car?
Yeah, as I said, it made no difference to the performance performance. Weight, restrictions on the intakes, none of that really had an effect. The cars were so good, and the engineers behind the cars were so good that they, said, oh, we need to do this, we need to change the weight balance a little bit. But in retrospect, it really didn't slow us down at all. Cars were so good.
Were there some tracks where the Audi was at a disadvantage? Like I remember watching the Long Beach races where it's super tight and watching you kind of struggle and saw at the wheel a little bit to get through the tightness of Long Beach versus something like Watkins Glen where you could really open it up.
It made no difference with the track. Some of the tighter tracks like Long Beach, you had a lot of different surface changes, and where the other cars might have an advantage in one place, you had an advantage in the other place. So it sort of worked itself out, but still, the worst conditions, like I remember we were running Texas. No, that was with the TransAm car. Texas, that was a joke. The surface was just, there was one line through the corners. And if you made one step out of that line, you were in the wall and in very tight quarters. And I remember passing Willie T. Ribs, and I got up alongside him. He was on the inside on the clean track, and I was in the sand. And I sort of kind of waved at him when I went by. He gave me the finger. He said, God damn. And, at the end of the race, he came up and he says, Jesus, this car is so good, make us all look really bad. So anyway, it was fun.
It's funny you mentioned that. We had Lynn St. James on quite a few times on the show. And in one of her interviews, we talked about this.
Was it really like that when you guys were competing against the Audis? Was everybody so upset about it? Was it really that earth-shattering?
It was awful. You would be hanging onto your car in a corner, and then they just go driving by, because you got that all-wheel drive. And it would be like, you would just cuss the hell out of everything. I mean, I could have killed Hurley and stuck, because it was like, I can remember Meadowlands particularly, because, when you get in these temporary circuits. And so it was maddening. It was brutal and maddening because it was an unfair advantage. I mean, there's turbos and there's normally aspirated that are racing against each other. They have different power bands. But eventually it evens out. And there are certain tracks that are handling tracks, certain tracks that are more high-speed tracks. If you have a handling car versus, one versus the other, but it eventually evens out. When they had that all-wheel drive, bullshit. I mean, that was never going to even out.
There's no balance of performance there, right?
No. Oh, of course now. Yeah. I mean, that's a whole different thing, the way the rules are. I mean, God, I'd hate to have to run a team right now because every week they change the BOP, and yeah, back then you were stuck, you were stuck with what you got, the way the rules were. They didn't change the rules that much throughout the year. And if they did, it was usually to your disadvantage. But that whole Audi all-wheel drive thing it makes me just livid thinking about it again, because we struggled so hard. God, it was awful.
The struggle was real for the rest of the drivers, but was it the sanctioning body penalizing the car, or was it the drivers complaining so much that you guys were so dominant that they wanted to pull the Audi back? Do you know what the politics was like at that time?
Our politics were governed by Joe Hoppen, and Joe Hoppen was a miracle man with the sanctioning bodies and the rules. So regardless of what they put on us, Joe would talk to the engineers and say, what would happen if we added 100 pounds or 50 pounds? And they would kind of look at Joe and say, nothing really. It wouldn't affect the cars at all, because the balance of those cars were so good that all of the things that they could put against us were irrelevant at that point. As far as the restrictions on the engines, the engines were way under stressed, especially with the TransAm motor. So there was a big margin. We didn't show everything at the beginning. We held a little bit back on the performance part of it, and they could put the restrictions on us, and it really didn't make any difference in the end.
So when you look back at Trans Am in those days, obviously the road courses they use are a little more rustic. You have things like the Meadowlands and Summit Point on the list and whatnot. But even the cars were almost, in a way, an homage to the days of Can-Am, where you could build what you wanted. You had Nissans, you had Corvettes, you had Audis, you had all sorts of stuff in Trans Am. What you're describing, I wonder, when you look back, do you think this was the beginning of almost like balance of performance, where they were trying to figure out a way to make the cars more competitive and more even?
Well, I think it was all the other manufacturers ganged up and said, this car is not fair. We can't compete against these cars. And we really had a great car, great engineers, and Joe Hoppen was a master at politics. that's the way it was. And I think that combination between the other drivers, the other teams, and the other manufacturers all ganged up, tried to get the sanctioning bodies to put, restrictions on us. But as I said, they made little difference in the performance.
So talking about some of those tracks, some are still used today in the TransAm series and others not so much. Are there some memorable tracks, favorite laps or moments that stick out for you behind the wheel of the Audi?
Well, the Audi was so good, both on the TransAm car and the GTO car, that regardless of what track you were on, it was like you just could screw with the other guys. You could run up alongside of them, go on the outside, go on the inside, and kind of wave as you went by, and that would just piss everybody off big time. So I remember one time Joe had said to both Hans and myself, the cars are good, but don't rub it in their nose. So that's what we had to do. But as a racing driver, especially with Hans was really good at pissing everybody off and making fun of it. So it was 2 years of great fun.
And there's some video of people like Hans Stuck would just pass people in the dirt or the grass because the car could do that. So the rest of the guys are like, what is he doing? He just drove me around me in the dirt.
And it's funny you bring that up because I remember distinctly watching one of the races with my dad, watching you, Hurley, Hans, and Walter driving the cars. And at one point, I vividly remember him saying, I think he just passed him in the grass. I mean, the kind of shenanigans that went down during the Trans Am era was absolutely amazing during that time. And I remember watching archive footage. And so I wanted to ask you, what was the deal with Hans antagonizing the other drivers with the doll in the rear glass that would basically moon everybody? Where did that come from?
I'm afraid I don't remember that part. Hans was always really great at coming up with, really weird things and, kind of rub it into everybody's face. Like, we're so good, we don't even have to try hard.
Walter's also part of this equation, and he's coming from World Rally Championship. You and Hans coming from road racing, everybody coming together, obviously under the auspices of the Volkswagen Audi group. What did you learn from each other? What did Walter teach you about driving an Audi, and how did you share your knowledge with Walter about road racing?
I don't think really that I had much to say about how to drive the cars with Walter. He was so good, and he had a long history with Audi. He helped us to get our heads around the trick to driving an all-wheel drive car was. Walter was so good, and he was very good at sharing knowledge, where most drivers are not willing to share setups or, how you would drive this corner, how you would drive that corner. Walter was really good, and I can remember many times going to Walter and said, what are you doing in this corner? What are you doing? And he would sit down and take a map and said, okay, this is what you do with the front wheel drive, all wheel drive, but especially with the viscous coupling. You couldn't do it from the cockpit, but you would come in and have the mechanics adjust the front to rear grip, the traction in those tires. That helped us a lot. We really work with that depending on the track we would go to. So he was really, really helpful for me, and the engineer that I had was really good. So we had a good combination.
I remember reviewing some of the file footage, and it alluded to Hans especially had to do a lot more left foot braking, especially with the early Trans Am car because of the amount of turbo lag from the single turbo that you guys had on there. Did you find yourself also doing a lot more left foot braking to keep it spooled up and get it to rotate and things like that?
I learned how to do that with the Can-Am car, the 917 and 10. And if you got off the boost in those cars, you were just lost. Everybody would go by you because you had to be very careful with the timing. So you would come in, do your braking, you would sort of fan the throttle to keep the boost up. And then when you would attack the throttle, you had boost and you didn't have a big lag. That sort of went away when you got into traffic. You really had to play your cards right on timing and pick where your windows of opportunity would be. Same with the Audi. The Audi on the lag situation, it was not really that significant. So you would late brake, get the car to turn, and then the balance between the front and the rear was almost perfect. So you didn't have any oversteer, you didn't have any understeer. You just had power to the ground, and that was what really separated us from the rest of the guys.
that wouldn't be the last time you drove with Hans Stuck and Walter Röhrl. And if we jump forward a little bit and then we'll dance back, you actually ran in 1993 with Hans and Walter at Le Mans in a 911 Turbo. Was that part of this whole Group 44 contract? How did that come to be?
No, it didn't have anything to do with the contract with Group 44. It was like a prototype 911 that we raced at Daytona and Sebring, I think. It was really fast. It was really a great car. And then we were also going to race that car at Le Mans with Stuck, myself, and Walter. That was the race, if my memory is correct, was the race that Walter retired after. So that was the end of that program. That was a really cool car, really fast.
Did you guys choose to drive together, or was that preordained?
It was preordained. They wanted an American, which was me, and Walter, of course, and Hans were great friends and fantastic drivers and very fast. So we were kicking ass in Daytona, and then we had, I think Danny Sullivan drove with us at Daytona. So there was 4 guys on the team at Daytona, and a mechanical failure. We were out of the race. We were leading at the time.
The sound of the 5-cylinder turbos is legendary. I mean, they sound like dragons with their tails on fire. I mean, they're pretty raucous and fans love it. But what's it like from inside the car?
The tailpipe sat halfway inside the cockpit and then would dump on the right side of the car. But you could definitely hear the chirping sound. That's what everybody loved. It would made a very distinctive sound as you would get off the power and then gradually get back on the power. It'd make that sort of fluttering sound. People just love that, and very distinctive, and you could tell it long before the car got within sight with your eyes. So you just knew the car was coming based on the sound.
I want to highlight a particular period in Audi's experimentation, which I believe you were involved in with Bobby Unser, and that's the infamous NASCAR Audi 200 trial, the all-black version of the Trans-Am car that was taken to Talladega for a test run. Can you talk a little bit about the why, the what, and what happened?
Vaguely remember that. I think that Bobby was more involved with the Pikes Peak stuff. The Talladega run, that was kind of outside of my book, so I didn't really pay too much attention to that. But when we decided that we were going to do this, Audi decided that we were going to do it, and Joe Halpin backed it up in the United States. When I went over and saw the kind of commitment that Audi was making to this program, both on the TransAm and GTO side, I said, this is going to be really, really good, very successful.
So the move from TransAm to IMSA makes sense. You guys came and did what you needed to do there and moved on to an unlimited class in GTO. How did the GTO chapter end? Was it just out of sheer frustration, or had Audi proven what they needed to with you and Hans behind the wheel of the GTO car? Or was there something else that said, no, we're done racing here?
They proved what they wanted to do. They wanted to make the all-wheel drive system something that people would look at and say, man, that would be great in my car, my street car. And then I really don't know what the politics were. The decision was made. We had won the championship. Hans did a great job. I was a backup in IMSA. Joe called up and said, that's it. We're not coming back the next year. And I was like, oh, you're kidding. And I think one of the reasons were politics, on how dominant we were. All the other manufacturers were threatening, we're not going to compete against this car. We're just not going to spend the money to compete against something that we just can't do. And their all-wheel drive systems were so far advanced from anybody else's system that, it would take the other guys a long time to catch up.
And in that same breath of a season, you went and drove a Ferrari F40 at the Glen in IMSA. How did that pan out?
Yours truly at the Ferrari Museum. I throw this in there for my own benefit, but I was the guy that had to go over there and homologate this car, Ferrari F40, which is 1989, to run in GT racing, both in the US and Europe. So whenever I go back there, they always remind me. I did 2 cars with Ferrari, that one and the 333 SP prototype. So this one sits in the Ferrari Museum. Hurley Haywood actually drove it. People don't realize Hurley Haywood drove Audis, he drove Porsches, he drove Ferraris, he drove Jaguars, he drove a lot of stuff, but he lives and breathes Porsches. Great guy.
Don't ask me. The team was from Italy, and they brought fantastic food with them, and we have these incredible luncheons, which they would cook. And, of all the cars that I've driven lots of different stuff, but that was really kind of a strange deal. I can't really remember what the conditions were that I had going that allowed me to drive the Ferrari in the first place. But it was so unique that everybody said, yeah, let Haywood try it, see what he thinks. And let me tell you, it was a missile that was ready to explode anytime. So I don't think we really finished any race without a major problem. And because of the mystique of the F40 and the sort of the emotion behind that car, behind the brand, it was sort of fun to be part of that. But from a racing standpoint, it was a real truck.
You were kind of wishing to be back in the Audi at that point, I
Yeah.
can imagine. At that time, there was a lot of things going on. And the struggle was real, especially with all the penalties that they were putting against and threats of banning and everything against Audi at that point. But when you look back, do you feel a sense of responsibility for really representing a new era of technology? I mean, you were on the cutting edge in racing across all disciplines outside of rally. It's like all-wheel drive in racing. Look at this. I mean, obviously it had been experimented with before, but winning behind the wheel, as you said, it proved it didn't matter the conditions, it didn't matter the track, what they did to the car. But when you look back, what does that mean to you to have been behind the wheel of the Audi?
You go through history, you look at cars that are really, really good, cars that are really bad. And I have been really, really lucky in my career that I've always had the opportunity to drive great cars. Very seldom in my career have I driven a car that I didn't like. Most of the time, those are with Porsches. But, with the Audi deal, Porsche wasn't racing against us. So that was a cool thing to do in the interim. If you look back at my racing career, I have always driven for manufacturers that had the unfair advantage. Look at Porsches. Everybody was, looking at us with a 911, basically a 911 that was running against Corvettes and Mustangs and all those cars, and we were wiping them up. I mean, it was just like we wouldn't be too great at the beginning in qualifying, but by mid-race, we'd caught up and passed all those guys. So I always had the ability to drive cars that were cutting-edge cars. Look at all the Porsches that I've driven over the years. The 962, 911 RSRs. I mean, all those cars were really, really fast and very, very advanced as far as the technology goes. Same with the Audi. A very short period of my racing career, but I was able to drive the latest technology and had it all work in my favor. So I was used to that. I was not an engineer. One of the things that Peter Gregg taught me was drive the cars as fast as you can go, articulate what's going on to the engineers, and let the engineers figure it out. Don't you try to engineer the car. I was not an engineer, and I've always maintained that. I'll drive the car, come in and tell the engineers what's going on, and they can fix it. And then I'll go out, and if it works, fine. If it doesn't, I'll say that, wrong direction. So if I have a good car underneath me, I'm going to do well with it. If I have a bad car, which has not happened often, but I'll drive it to its extent. Sometimes that's enough.
Well, when we visited the Le Mans chapter of your career, one of the questions we asked was, what did Le Mans teach you? And so I wanted to rephrase that to ask, what did the Audi teach you? What did it bring to your driving style that you carried with you to the rest of your racing?
I don't think I could take what the Audi was doing with me driving it and translate that into any other car I've driven. All-wheel drive on a race car was something that only lasted for a very brief period of time. And then all the other manufacturers and sanctioning bodies banned four-wheel drive technology because it was so good. You kind of learn how to cope with the advantages and disadvantages of race cars that you're driven. And we learned how to maximize that four-wheel drive technology. But when that technology was then banned worldwide, that was the end of that deal.
Hurley, in the last couple of years, there was an Audi Heritage video that came out where they brought out all the drivers and going back to the Silver Arrows days. And it was a very long retrospective and homage to Audi's racing legacy. And so I wanted to ask you, if you could climb back into one of your cars that you drove back then, either the Trans-Am or the GTO, how do you think revisiting that car today would feel for you?
In the day, that technology proved to be better than anybody else's. When you fast forward to current cars that are on today, It's a driver's responsibility to maximize the performance of any car that he's driving, whether it's a sedan street car on street tires in a kind of vintage car racing scenario. You maximize the limits of that car. You draw that line with a sharp pen or you draw it with a big crayon. It's your job getting close to that limit. And every car has a different limit. Every car has a different personality. Yes, we were dominant in the Trans-Am and GTO, but other cars, let's just fast forward to the 993, the Penske car. That car is so good, and the engineers behind that car are so good that a lot of times the competition just can't keep up. And they won the manufacturer's championship, they won the driver's championship, and the racing was really, really good. And they're up against really good cars, Action Express car, the Chevrolet, the Fords, all those cars. But Porsche has made these great cars. They've had great engineers, and that line goes through all the cars. We didn't really race against any other Porsches in the Trans Am and the IMSA days. They were all big block Detroit iron that we were up against. So Porsche kind of sat back and said, okay, let's check this out. But they went more conventional side, and the conventional, like the 962, was brilliant. And that car's lifespan was really a long period of time. It's 10 years. I won the last major race in that car in 1991. And then they canceled that program and went with more GT-based cars.
So you mentioned earlier, I think the key word is dominance. They dominated in World Rally. They dominated in Trans Am. They dominated in IMSA. They went on to dominate at Le Mans. Do you think Audi can dominate in Formula One?
That's a hard question. I don't know if they're going to just supply the engine or whether they're going to supply the chassis. Formula One is a very difficult series to be in. You really have to have a truckload of money to make it all work. The sanctioning bodies and the FIA and all the people that are involved in Formula One is a hard nut to break into. So if Audi is willing to spend that money, then they will be successful. And they've been successful in every racing endeavor that they've chosen to go into. And we just have to see what happens.
Well, Hurley, I got to personally thank you for taking the time out and connecting my boyhood fantasies and dreams and watching you on television with the reality of what was going on the track with you behind the wheel. I mean, it's been an absolute honor to be able to interview you, but talk about such a influential time when I was coming up as a motorsport enthusiast. And so this has been absolutely incredible to get your insight and your view on what it was like to be behind the wheel of the Audi. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
It's my pleasure. Always have a good time talking to you.
Thanks, Hurley.
All right, bye.
We hope you enjoyed another awesome episode of Break Fix Podcast, brought to you by Grand Touring Motorsports. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or get involved, be sure to follow us on all social media platforms at Grand Touring Motorsports. And if you'd like to learn more about the content of this episode, be sure to check out the follow-on article at gtmotorsports.org. We remain a commercial-free and no annual fees organization through our sponsors, but also through the generous support of our fans, families, and friends through Patreon. For as little as $2.50 a month, you can get access to more behind-the-scenes action, additional Pit Stop Minisodes, and other VIP goodies, as well as keeping our team of creators fed on their strict diet of Fig Newtons, gummy bears, and Monster. So consider signing up for Patreon today at www.patreon.com/GT Motorsports. And remember, without you, none of this would be possible.